My name is JerriAnne Boggis, and I'm the Executive Director for the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
I'm David Waters, a board member of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
And we're here today to talk a little bit about the African Burying Ground and the African Burying Ground Memorial, and a little bit about the history of the place, its recovery, and reintroduction to the community at large. If you look around, you'll notice that this is unlike any other normal burying ground or cemetery that you would visit. There are no markers, individual markers marking different people's resting place. There's no lawn, there's no greenery. In fact, it was a street with houses built on both sides. And yes, the story of African Americans and Africans who were buried here was literally erased and built on top of. So today we'll talk a little bit about the story and its recovery.
And probably, a couple of hundred people buried here underneath the street, stretching up to the next street, and then probably down under the houses here and down into the next street as well. And so there were a lot of people here, and people knew too.
Yeah. So one of the things that we know, Valerie Cunningham, who did a lot of work in recovering New Hampshire's Black history, found a map, a 1705 map, when she was doing some research in the area. On the map, there was a sign that read, the Negro Burying Ground, and it was the first time that she had seen that and known that there was a whole burying ground designated for African and African Americans. Yes, we were segregated even in burials. So we're not exactly sure how far back or how wide the cemetery goes because that map was open-ended. But as David pointed out, where some of the boundaries we know, but not the end part. And during that unearthing of the remains, because of the density and because of that area of the map, the archaeologists assumed that there were probably 200 souls buried here. So that gives us an idea of the depth and the breadth of the African community here in Portsmouth.
And so, up until about 1800, African Americans buried their dead here and honored them. And certainly there were probably burials over in the kind of outskirts of the Point of Graves. So there are these sites, but here probably was from the earliest times where Black people gathered to commemorate their dead.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things with that unearthing. There were such few artifacts found, one reasoning because of the area, it was sewer pipes. When they unearthed the coffins, there were sewer pipes running through a lot of the burials. So that disintegrated a lot of the artifact materials that we would look at. But it also could point to a tradition of burying, an African style of burying, without the headstones.
So this was not unknown, and
No.
The history books and people knew that they were here, but this became valuable land. Portsmouth was growing up from the port area, and they wanted the land, and they took it.
And that speaks to who and what we value in our country. One of the things that I always find really interesting to look at, the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail back in 2000 had put a marker on one of the buildings that designated and said that this was the African Burying Ground. When the remains were unearthed, everyone in town was so shocked to rediscover that there was an African burying ground here. And so, people were walking by that sign day after day, and from 2000 for 3 years, and still it was a surprise that there was an African burying ground here.
I was there for one of the times when the local funeral parlor backed the ambulance down, and then the archaeologists had put the coffin, because their coffin remains kind of, and then they were, of course, filled with clay because of the sewer pipe and everything else is in there, and the bones, and so then we carried them one at a time up into the back of the ambulance, so they could, in prayer, so they could be respectful. taken, and then what to do? You know, what is Portsmouth going to do? We can't bury it again, right?
Well, there was two things that happened here that was I felt was really good. There, the archaeologists, of course, because they were protocols put in that if remains were unearthed, they would follow these protocols. But the archaeologists took an image of that row of coffins with that 18th century clay pipe going through it, you know, which is just, again, that speaks to that destruction of the African American history, that story. But, you know, with those remains, those coffins sitting in the muck, it was just a really good metaphor for our, in the muck of that history, the muck of the treatment of enslaved people in life and in death.
I remember Oscar Mokeme, who an Igbo chief who came to officiate here at the reburial of the 18 persons whose remains had been dug up, said that the ancestors decided now the time was right to come back, and that thought that maybe Portsmouth was ready for it.
It was remarkable too, because it was at the same time that different graves were being unearthed all across the country. In Rhode Island, the major one we know of in New York City, in Connecticut. So here we are in Portsmouth, you know? Portsmouth, a place where nobody, the narrative
the
is
North.
The North.
The free North.
Great white North, you know? No, we never had slavery here. If you think of Virginia, where the first enslaved people came, and realize that they don't have a memorial to that story. And we, in Portsmouth, in New Hampshire, have this story that tells us it's a way for us to really start really looking at that history and start that dialogue. You can't come to this spot and this place and not think about slavery. You know, that's the story. You can't come here and not think about the systemic erasure of Africans and Africans Americas in the story. We have to look at the crimes against the black body. We have to talk about it. We can't bury it. We have to show that, yes, for a long history, for most of America's history, black lives did not matter. We could abuse them, we could destroy them, we could build over their very graves, right? And that's what this place speaks to. So we have to come to that reckoning. We have to look at our history without rose-colored glasses. All traditions have this culture of honoring their dead, right? Of in some way honoring their life. They say if you call their name, the dead are always with you. So we have that thing of honoring the dead, learning from them. And to dishonor a space is sacrilege. And bring it back, it's where we need to be in the country. The African Burying Ground here speaks to that complete history that we need to look at. You know, bringing our African brothers and sisters and children to this country unlawfully, kidnapping them from their homes, bringing them here, having them work as slaves to build this democracy that we have, and then totally wiping out their existence, even erasing their burial sites. So it's called for a reckoning. It's called for let's look at this history. And this burial ground tells you that. This is my hope, that once we put this, make it visible and people start talking about it, that we can return some of that dignity.